This is the Jerusalem Post podcast Travel Edition. Coming up,
we have to think about how do we continue to tell these stories for 8th graders, 9th graders who often come to visit us.
One of the best options we could think of as a second work in our new installation room in the bunker was Banksy's Girl Without Balloon.
Weißwurst, which is a white sausage which we eat for breakfast with a Weiss beer and a sweet mustard and pretzel.
So sit back and enjoy the trip with David Harris and Mark Gordon. Guten Morgen, David.
I'm sorry, I don't speak things other than English and Hebrew. What are you trying to say to me?
I'm trying to say good morning, but from this stunning 15th floor restaurant in Germany.
I have deliberately positioned myself facing away from the floor to ceiling huge windows that give us, well, depending on where you sit, a 300-degree view of the place where we are, Munich.
The sign outside saying no podcasters, no influencers, so we're talking quietly and doing this almost secretly.
It's actually very funny that you say that. We're at a table laid out for about 15, 16 people, and it says reserved on it, and we're the only ones on the table because all of our journalistic colleagues who are accompanying us on this trip are probably still fast asleep. But you and I got up at the crack of dawn because we want to bring you parts of this. Well, I already know because I've been here before, this beautiful city.
For you, the listener, we've got extra parts of our little trip. We're going to try and find some of the Jewish life of Munich, where we are, as well as... Did we say we were in Munich, or we just said we were in Munich?
I did.
You're talking so quietly.
It's not just because there are people around us. Well, we're not jet lagged because we've flown in from Israel to Munich, but I think you just get tired. First of all, we've just flown a lot, but when you come into somewhere and you get in, midnight to your hotel room and you want to discover where the bath towels are or where the soap dispenser is, and you're like half asleep, so you do all of that and then you climb into bed, you sleep fitfully the first day and you wake up really early and then your voice sounds like ours.
I was out like a light.
Again,
we didn't really get into midnight. We got in at 10:30, and the first thing we did was go around the corner in this wonderful...
I built up this whole fantastic scene and you destroy it in one sentence.
Yeah, because it was just a whinge for the sake of it. So we're in Werksviertel, or Werksviertel, which is an old industrial district which has been, to use the probably not the correct phrase, tarted up and made very lovely. It's like a young, hip entertainment district, and just around the corner from our very modern hotel that probably was an old industrial building is a restaurant and entertainment area, and we went for a lovely curry.
And you'll find there karaoke bars, there's Japanese cuisine. It really is amazing. I think a lot of what the German National Tourist Board want to do in bringing this journalistic group into Bavaria is to show how you can take something that is old, that is falling out of favour economically, where you have factories and warehouses that are no longer used for the original purpose, and you can turn it into something very successful, and as we saw last night, very busy.
I think you were talking about us there, old falling out of favour, but very successful.
Yeah, but you can't really sort of reinvent us. We are what we are.
Over the next months, for you, the listener, you'll hear podcasts from various parts of Bavaria, and we will try and bring you not just the traditional tourist sites, but a little bit of Bavarian life as well, and cuisine, and obviously the beer.
What does Munich mean?
Oh, there's a good question. Should we do that as our quiz question?
What a good idea.
The answer at the end of the podcast.
Hi, this is David Harris from the Jerusalem Post podcast Travel Edition. Find us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at MarkDavidPod, or mail us at markdavidpod@gmail.com.
We caught the S-Bahn above ground train from our hotel by the East Munich station, and within 6 minutes or so we're right in the heart of Munich Old Town.
We are standing in Marienplatz, which is a central square in the older area of Munich. We arrived just in time for the bells at the town hall, the Rathaus. Such a good name, isn't it, Rathaus?
just let's describe what we see around us. First of all, what's very interesting are the flags on the Rathaus. You've got the, I assume, Bavarian flag, you have the European Union flag, you have a flag identifying with Ukraine. These are not just flags, these are long banners, and there's one that I'm sure you want to mention.
Yes, I only just spotted it when I was doing another circuit. Next to the Ukrainian flag is the Israeli flag. That's quite a surprise, really.
I think the identification of Germany with Israel for obvious reasons for decades, and the support that Germany has given Israel for decades, is worthy of mention, and a thank you to the good folks of the Rathaus for making that identification very public at such a difficult time.
Thank you to the city of Munich for displaying the Israeli flag maybe nearly 2 years now after October the 7th and still supporting Israel.
Let's have a look around this square. So off to our left are the more modern buildings. Those are certainly 20th century. But as we do a circuit, we can see behind us a stunning church and accompanying tower, and what looks below. And of course, we haven't actually learnt anything about this. We haven't had a tour guide, so we're just guessing. But a beautiful gate built within the tower that's attached to the church. There's also a mass of clocks all around us.
To the other side, there are two domes. Very familiar. I don't know if you've been to, well, we've been to Berlin. If you remember the synagogue in Berlin, it had these sort of onion-shaped domes. But I think this is probably a church over there, or maybe an Eastern church of some description. And then behind us, yet another church on Peterplatz in a very similar style to the one with the gate over there.
And surprisingly enough, a mass of people. There's also a small market here with avocados and, gosh, what's that in the middle of those amazingly large dried mushrooms?
Possibly porcini mushrooms. I think it's fruit of some description. Should we go and have a look?
Sure, let's take our bags. We'll keep talking. We're wandering over now. Mark's pointing. Mark suffers definitely from some form of journalist's ADHD.
A very funny sign, which I won't mention on here.
I think you're going to find that word rather a lot in Germany. So we're headed over and we're about to find out what this is. I still don't know. No, it's mushrooms, isn't it?
Oh yeah, mushrooms, which is very strange because this is all fruit. Look at those cherries. Kirschen. Oh, from Canada, but we won't mention that. Mangoes, lychees, damsons. It's beautiful. And in the middle, strangely, mushrooms.
I was here about 10 years ago and I came for a soccer game, but it coincided with the Christmas market. And about 100 yards, 100 or so metres from where we're standing, they had a stall that sold nothing but what we call in Yiddish, latkes.
Ooh, let's find that.
I think it was just here for the Christmas market, but I'm happy to try.
Let's wait until Christmas. I want latkes.
Meantime, let's go and see the Jewish Museum.
Have you listened to the Jerusalem Post podcast Travel Edition? I'm David Harris, and together with my co-host Mark Gordon, we bring you the best from the world of travel and tourism.
We have people who literally fly to Park City just to do the ski minion.
And it has that heavenly taste that you don't really find nowadays in the market.
When was the last time you went to a restaurant and they bought you a picnic basket about 8 courses in?
The Dracula tour, that's a very unusual honeymoon option, really.
The Jerusalem Post podcast Travel Edition brings you the joys of travel and tourism. So why not subscribe today wherever you get your podcasts?
Cheers, Mark.
Cheers, David.
Oh, we made it into the Jewish Museum here in Munich. First thoughts, Mark?
I never thought we would make it with all the pictures we were taking along the way of silly words, but yes, we are here. Really stunning building. It reminds me a little. Do you remember we went to our local museum in Modi'in?
Oh gosh, yes.
It looks very interactive. It's compact, but it tells a story in a very modern way. It's very eye-catching. That's what it reminds me of.
In fact, we've only walked since we've been in here, since we came into the main exhibition. We've walked, about 25 feet, if that, and we already have the whole of the history, the highlights obviously, dating back to the Middle Ages. But we also have with us a tour guide who made those 25 feet extremely interesting, and she is the education curator at the Jewish Museum in Munich, and her name, guess what I remembered, is Sapir von Abel. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you and hello.
Tell us a little bit just generally about this museum, where it's located, when it opened and so on.
So the museum is located at the city center of Munich. It's between the Marienplatz, where the city hall is, and the famous marketplace Viktualienmarkt, which is the city market. And it opened in 2007. And in our permanent exhibition, we showcase the history of Jewish communities in Munich, but also Jews in Munich since the mid-ages, with a focus on the 19th and 20th century. Exhibition is 7 stations with different focuses. We have a few objects, but we also have an interactive part. We have a timeline, we have a comic. We hope that every visitor is able to be interested in 1 or 2 of the stations and then goes from there.
Where would you start a tour of the museum?
I usually start at the timeline because I think it's important to give an overview of the history, and then also I have my favorite objects, obviously, where I really like to go. I often talk a bit about the architecture of the synagogues, because through the architecture of the synagogues you can learn quite a lot about the communities during that time. And then I continue with some of the historical objects that we have. And our highlight, obviously, is the interactive city map, where we find more than 10 very specific biographies about specific Jews that were living in Munich and impacted the city in one way or another.
I noticed as we came in, you ran off to this interactive map, because off on the left-hand side, you have these sort of 2-foot tall markers, and you've got numbers on the markers and you've got numbers on the map, and you were putting 2 or 3 of them in the right place. We'll go and look at that in a few minutes, but now what we're going to do is a potted short history of 800 years of Jewish presence in this city. So take us through the early Middle Ages.
Munich is not a typical city for Jews where we have a presence that is strong for the mid-ages. On the contrary, Jews had a very tough beginning to even get their foot inside the city and to be able to settle down and buy places and so on. So the mid-ages are not so interesting for us. We have some stories that we know that communities settled here, and then there were pogroms, unfortunately, and they were expelled again. And then the most important is the Jews that then had a personal relationship with the royal family that lived here, with the Duke. They were working for the Duke, and then they were able to come back to the city and slowly get a foot again.
Moving towards the end of the 19th century, the name Theodor Herzl briefly pops up on the timeline. What's the relationship with Theodor Herzl and Munich?
Theodor Herzl asked the Munich community if he was able to hold the first Zionist World Congress in Munich. The Jewish community in Munich declined. They were not so happy about the request, because they were quite concerned that the suspicion would come up that they were not loyal to the Bavarian state, and for them the Bavarian identity was very much apparent and was very important for their relationship with the city and with the people that were also living here.
Skipping through the development and growth of the community during the early part of the 20th century. On the eve of the Second World War, you're looking at about 9,000-10,000 Jews. In 1938, even before Kristallnacht, the main synagogue was systematically taken apart and its pieces being used elsewhere in the town in architecture and construction. Destruction of the community during the Second World War. What happened straight after in 45-46?
The US Army had their presence in southern Germany, especially in Bavaria, and they converted Munich to the center of the DPs, displaced persons. So outside of Munich, there were quite a lot of displaced persons camps, where people who survived the camps were initially located. And in Munich itself, in the neighborhood of Bogenhausen, the US Army installed built various offices of international aid organizations, and also the first Jewish organizations were located there. So the Jewish DPs knew that in Munich they would get certain help, for example, for their visa, or also the information about missing family members, what was also very important, and they could find it here in Munich.
Today's community in Munich potentially numbers more than the community that was around in 1939. What has happened in the last 80 years to grow that community, and has it all been plain sailing, or were there times in the middle where it's been tough for the Jewish community here?
It took a while, obviously, after the war to settle again a Jewish presence in the city. And that is true for the whole of Germany, I would say. A huge turning point is the 1990s with the fall of the Soviet Union, that a lot of Jewish immigrants were able to come on a visa to Germany, and they made sure, or consequently, the Jewish community grew because of the migration from the former Soviet Union. But obviously, it's always like a process when new people come in, and when people with different languages and different traditions enter a community. So that is something that took a while until new identities were formed. But I believe that second and third generation of these immigrants are very much established here as Munich Jews or Bavarian Jews, and found their own identities as well.
In case I forget when we record in a couple of minutes after listeners hear a break, this centre where we are is next to the main synagogue. There's also a Jewish community centre with a restaurant. Can people just rock up? Can people just come here and visit all three places, or are there some restrictions?
So the Jewish Museum in Munich is a city museum, so we have opening hours from Tuesday until Sunday, 10 until 6. So we are always open on these days. People who wish to visit the synagogue would have to be in touch with the Jewish community. Obviously, if someone wants to come and pray on Friday evening or Shabbos morning, there's a form to fill out online and to be in contact with the Jewish community, but they have their own rules and regulations who's when to enter.
As advertised, here's some music.
Now David's music has finished, we return to the Jewish Museum in Munich, but we've changed floors and changed to the museum's temporary exhibition. Sapir, tell us about the temporary exhibition.
The temporary exhibition is called The Third Generation, the Holocaust and Family Memory. It's an exhibition that was first showcased in the Jewish Museum in Vienna and then came to us in Munich. We adjusted the exhibition a little bit. We added more Munich perspectives as well. And the exhibition is showcasing objects of artists who are second or third generation, whose families were affected by the Shoah. Through their own personal approaches to their family biographies, they make art that is sometimes telling very specific stories of their family histories, sometimes a more abstract approach to the past, but they're all connected through the underlying transgenerational traumata that usually survivor families have held within.
I promise we'll end this interview on a high, but right now, having been through both of these floors, I'm feeling down. Is that what you want visitors to experience through this exhibition on these two floors?
I'm not so big with emotions, but if people have more like questions and maybe get a sense of how would I deal with a difficult family story, what would my approach be, that is, I think, something that we want to evoke in the visitors, but also to show that there is not one way to deal with a very, very traumatic past, and that each family has their own biographies, obviously, and also their own approaches to what had happened to their grandparents.
In the permanent exhibition,
There's a section with Judaica and Jewish symbols that are supposed to illustrate very clearly this is what Jews use within their prayers. In this exhibition, nothing is very straightforward. You're trying to get people to think, aren't you? That each piece is like a conversation piece.
That's true, yes. We really try to open up the room for discussion and also to thoughts and ideas. Trauma is very difficult to actually speak about in general. We know that from the first generations they were not able to speak about what happened to them, about the horrific things that they had to go through. So only through the second and sometimes even through the third generation, families sometimes were able to make a better sense of it and also to get like a more distance look at it, not through the immediate after effects of the Shoah.
Mark, let's you and I talk for a minute about two of the exhibits I think that we were most drawn to. One was almost like a fantasy wallpaper collage, and one was a group of one-man photographs. Which one do you want to do first?
Well, we might as well start with the wallpaper, which was the first exhibit we saw. It looks like a children's nursery wallpaper almost, and as you get closer, you see that the pictures are not necessarily happy pictures. There's someone holding on to a Havdalah candle, and then you look closer and closer and you see more trauma in it. Obviously, as Sapir said, it gets you thinking about the story and about how it affects you as someone who is in a later generation.
I've noticed over the years that you and I have worked together that you are a lot more observant than me, and I thought I was an observant person, not religiously, but in terms of vision. You're pointing to your glasses. You see,
because I wear glasses, and whenever we go anywhere, you go, "What does that say?" And I go, "Oh, number 13."
Yeah. So Sapir asked us as we went to a bank of about 25, 30 photographs if we noticed anything bizarre about them, and you got it immediately. Had you cheated? Had you already looked at the panel?
No, I hadn't looked at the panel, but I looked at 2 or 3 of the photos and I thought, that's clearly a man dressed as a woman. And I started to notice the facial features were the same.
Every single image is the man portraying people from his family that didn't make it into the modern era, that didn't create progeny.
Raphael Goldschin's series of portraits, black and white portraits, it's called I Am My Family. And I think through the title, we also already get a sense of what he tried to do here. He imagined himself into the portraits of family members. Some of them actually did survive the Shoah. They immigrated from Poland to Chile. I didn't look into each and every member of the family, but what makes it apparent is that he tried to recreate a photo album that maybe he never had in this sense. And I think that's also a feeling that families of Shoah survivors often have, that they're missing family members, they're missing crucial parts of any family life, which is photo albums. And Raphael Goldschin also imagines some of the family members and he added them. So not all of the showcase portraits are actually known members of his family, some are also imaginative.
If you're thinking that these are going to be the rather staid photographs of your great-grandparents where everybody is standing up erect without a smile on the face, looking miserably at the camera, you have to think again. These are crazy, evocative self-portraits. They're quite something.
One thing for me about this exhibition, I was talking to David on the flight over here, that I'd seen a Hollywood production about the Holocaust recently, and I felt nothing while watching. I mean, obviously I felt something, but it felt very Hollywood until at the end of the 8 programs they said this is actually a true story and showed the people that had survived and the next generation and the next generation after that. And walking through here, there were 2 things that brought it back to my family. One was going up the stairs, there was a quote from Theo Richmond, who wrote a book about the town where my grandmother came from, Konin, which David and I visited. But also there were objects here, objects from the Shoah. One particularly was a guitar, and it tells the story of 2 people that were in Theresienstadt who then ended up dying in Auschwitz. The stories now of the Shoah is something we learned in January at Yad Vashem, that it's objects now that will tell the story rather than people. Is that part of the aim as well here, that we know that the last survivors of the Holocaust are leaving us? It's important to tell the story through other means.
Yes, for sure. We have to think about how do we continue to tell these stories, and we also have to continue to think about how do we connect the newer generations to this past, because it's not so easy now to just tell a story which has happened 80, 90 years ago to a different reality now for 8th graders, 9th graders who often come to visit us. The question remains, what is with the next generations, and how do we connect the past to the present?
Sapir, before we say goodbye, until when is this temporary exhibition open for the public to visit?
It's open until the 1st of March.
And if anybody wants details about the museum, either just to look online because they won't come here, or obviously to find out details of opening hours, do you have a website where people can find out more?
Yes, the website of the Jewish Museum. It's also available in English. There are all the information about the current exhibition. We also have a quite active Instagram account where also there are information about special tours or some interviews with artists, so that's also a possibility.
Sapir von Abel, Curator of Education at the Munich Jewish Museum, thank you for educating us for the last couple of hours.
Thank you for having me.
You're listening to the Jerusalem Post podcast, Travel Edition.
We are in the beautiful Italian city of Napoli.
We're in downtown Dubai.
We are at the Mountain Dew Synagogue in Baku.
We are in the magnificent city Krakow.
The Jerusalem Post podcast Travel Edition brings you the joys of travel and tourism. So why not subscribe today wherever you get your podcasts?
Bavaria Fact File. Munich Airport is the main airport for the region and a main hub for Lufthansa, with flights from 11 US cities, Canada, the UK, and most cities around the world. Lufthansa also fly from Tel Aviv to Munich, as do El Al and Arkia. Bavaria has other international airports, including Nuremberg, with flights from most major European cities, and Memmingen Airport, which is served by low-cost airlines. Ryanair run a service between Memmingen and Tel Aviv. Munich has an integrated underground and overground railway system taking you to most parts of the city. The S8 will take you from the airport to the city centre in half an hour. In Munich, we stayed in the Werksviertel district in the Gambino Hotel. For a touch of luxury, try the Rosewood, Mandarin Oriental, Kempinski or Charles Hotel. Bavaria has a mild continental climate with 4 distinct seasons, including warm, sunny summers and cold, snowy winters. Temperatures typically range from around 3 degrees Celsius, 37 Fahrenheit in January, to 25 degrees Celsius, 78 Fahrenheit in July. The region experiences distinct seasonal changes with comfortable to warm conditions from May to September and cold, snowy weather from November to March. Typical Bavarian food includes hearty favourites such as roast pork, pork knuckle and sausages and dumplings. A traditional rural Bavarian delight is a meat and cheese platter known as a Brotzeit-Platter, featuring a variety of hearty, savoury German meats like Leberkäse and Bratwurst, local cheeses such as Obatster or Bergkäse, crusty bread, pickles, radishes and condiments like mustard. For vegetarian, there is Käsespätzle, noodles soaked in cheese topped with roasted onions, and Reibekuchen, a grated potato patty deep fried in oil similar to a latke. In Munich, there is the Einstein kosher restaurant, and look out for the Israeli Levantine restaurant Schmock.
Hi everybody, I would like to welcome you on behalf of the City of Munich. I'm a licensed city guide. My name is Uschi. I used to live and have my career in Silicon Valley in San Francisco, but I came back to my hometown in 2016 and I really enjoy what I'm doing. So I have the pleasure to show you the slaughterhouse quarter, or the factory quarter as it's called.
Mark, that was our tour guide, and we're probably, hopefully, going to hear quite a bit more of her. But where she met us was outside the hotel where we're staying in the
Werksviertel.
Tell me about the Werksviertel.
The Werksviertel is a district that used to be owned by a large food production company that mainly made dumplings. And then they realised that the value of the land they had was worth more than their dumplings. So they started selling it out and turning it into a high-tech district with lots of towers and hotels and startups and even some sheep grazing on a roof.
Next to a bar. So you can go up onto the roof, get this phenomenal view of all of Munich and listen to sheep grazing. I wonder what they do with them in weather.
I think they still take them for dumplings, but let's not talk about that.
Let's talk about the food options that are available in that area.
Within the Werksviertel district, there are lots of small takeaways that are used, I think, by the businesses there for Uber Eats or Volt or whatever. Volt, see, I'm talking German. Wolt, or any of the companies like that deliver to offices. But also, last night we ate at this beautiful Indian restaurant, which had a selection of vegetarian snacks. It was really rather nice.
If you associate Munich and Bavaria with meat, what's phenomenal, as our guide was telling us as we were making our way across Munich, is that there are so many vegetarians and vegans in the city that you're seeing vegetarian places popping up all across town. What we've done is pop up across the other side of town. We're going to a place called either the Old Slaughterhouse or the Meat Packing District. We don't know what's there.
Probably loads of vegetarian restaurants.
The chairs here are quite funky. They're tartan, and embroidered on the back are some pictures of foxes with monocles.
We've opened a fine rosé from the Pays d'Oc region of southeastern France.
To stand in front of the Birth of Venus by Botticelli and just take it in.
Turning their backs on these magnificent architectural wonders, and all they want to do is have that Instagram moment.
I listened to the guide for 2 minutes while I was on Wikipedia.
You're listening to the Jerusalem Post podcast travel edition with Mark Gordon and David Harris.
Munich has grown a lot. The meatpacking district has actually kept its original face, so to speak. It's actually in transition. It has everything from the old to the super new. We got the folk theater, we have the graffiti sprayers, we have the meat packing, we have the cattle yard, and so it's a very lively neighborhood. And as such, we have lots of restaurants, lots of cafes. And also historically, this quarter here attracted a lot of workers, especially from Italy. Why? Because it was a workers' district about 150 years ago, especially bleacheries, tanneries, leather-producing industries. So it was a very attractive place of the city for people coming also from the countryside and especially from Italy to really find work here. That has not really changed that much. I mean, there's certainly a lot of gentrification going on, like in most cities. And as I said, I mean, 150 years ago, this district was outside the city, but now it's pretty much in the city with all its problems. Munich was Hitler's most favorite city. He called it the city of movement, and it was also the headquarters of the National Socialists. During that time, between 1939 and 1945, there was also a lot of resistance here, and also a lot of Jewish people. You know, people who really knew Hitler was not the right guy to really lead the country. There was always a very, very good mix. And today, there's still a lot of really old shops, like for example here up front there's like a knife shop and they still sharpen your knives. The butchers usually still have the old license, meaning the shops open at 6 a.m. and close at 2 p.m. There's a lot of these old stuff going on mixed with actually really good vegan restaurants who, like the restaurant we just passed, who wanted to establish themselves here just to really show the contrast and the opposites, you know, like gentrification, worker, the vegan movement, meat packing, the wholesale, veggies and fruit. Everything is pretty much here.
If you think the quality of the audio is not what you're used to on this podcast, that's because it's raining. We don't bring out our fancy microphones in this weather. What we do is record to telephone, so please forgive us for the poorer audio quality. while I was explaining to our listeners about the reason why the audio quality isn't so good at the end of Usha's words, you were actually listening to her. She talked about a very interesting resident of this part of town.
Albert Einstein used to live in this district. His parents had an electrical store on the main road. We walked past the main road about 5 minutes ago, and now we're here. He had his schooling here before he went off to Italy, where his parents had emigrated to. I think he was originally born in Ulm, but he certainly had his schooling in Munich. And as I said earlier, I'm sure this place will be full of vegetarian restaurants. The first thing we walked past was a vegan restaurant, and now I can see salad and falafel over there.
And finger food.
This is Mark Gordon from the Jerusalem Post Podcast Travel Edition. Find us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at MarkDavidPod, or mail us at markdavidpod@gmail.com.
I just ran like an excited little boy to go and take a photograph of something. We'll tell you about what I went to photograph in a minute because it's immature David. But again, unusually actually, Mark was paying more attention to the tour guide than I was. So you want to talk a little bit about the area of the People's Theatre?
Yes, the slaughterhouse that was built in the 1880s was flattened maybe 10 years ago, and over the next 3 or 4 years the People's Theatre of Munich, the Volkstheater, was built here. It's a complex with 3 theatres, one large theatre which seats about 500 people, and then 2 smaller theatres that seat around 300 people. The director of the theatre is also the director of the Oberammergau Passion Play, which for Jews, if they know the Passion Play, has anti-Semitic tropes in it. It's quite complex to be here and understand that.
The one thing I did hear from one of the group is that one of the things that the current director of the Passion Play did was introduce an Arab to play the role of Jesus, and a lot of the traditional Catholics didn't like that either.
But then we're in the area of Goethe and some of his writings were also maybe anti-Nazi, but some of his early writings were also relatively anti-Semitic. It's quite a difficult area, which then brings us to David's childish little run.
If you remember when we were in Berlin, we went to a restaurant called Canaan. You can go back and listen to that particular podcast. It's run by an Israeli Jew and a Palestinian Arab. Together they introduce Middle Eastern recipes with a flair, with a twist, and they employ Syrian refugees and other people, and they're trying to show that there can be islands of peace. Apparently there's also one in Munich.
Yes, the theatre has a restaurant built in, run by an Israeli, basing itself on Levantine cuisine, Middle Eastern cuisine, and the project tries to employ people both Israeli and from the Arabian region. And strangely enough, what do you call this restaurant of cooperation? It's called Schmuck, and that's why David goes running.
Behind the area of the Volkstheater and all of that change, we came into a large open space where they used to unload all of the cattle that were being slaughtered to provide meat for the people. And by the way, while the idea of a slaughterhouse may sound somewhat cruel to our modern ear, at the end of the day, what they were doing was making the place a lot less diseased. Those illnesses from the Middle Ages disappeared in the late 1800s when this slaughterhouse was built, because the water was pure in the town. They were no longer slaughtering in their homes into the local streams as the rain starts pouring down. What I wanted to talk about is the area we've come to now.
The area we're standing in is the area where the cattle were unloaded. It was a wide open space. They're no longer coming off the trains, so this space has been converted using old railway wagons and containers from Hamburg seaport into a cultural centre called Bahnwärter Thiel. And people live here, people do their art and design here. There are a few small restaurants and a concert venue which is always packed every evening. It's kind of an alternative place covered in graffiti and graffiti art, but it's really, really fascinating. Just walking past a piercing shop, I'm sure there's a tattooist nearby. There's a guy here working with old cycle tyres. Really interesting place.
And then after a while, every year is 10 centimeters less about the working, and then after 3-4 years, then gets green, You can see it over
The gentleman who is standing over the bicycle tyres is explaining why he has stuck together. At the moment it looks like about 20 bicycle tyres, but in the long run he's got many more, and he's going to be filling it the whole time. And in fact, if we look above us, he clearly is into bicycle art, because what he does after he's removed the tyres is he takes the actual wheels and turns them into a dome above his caravan home. Have you listened to the Jerusalem Post podcast travel edition yet? Hi there, I'm David Harris, and together with co-host Mark Gordon, we bring you the very best of the world of travel.
We've had our safety instructions and we're in a basket.
Either the cars are shrinking or we're going higher.
Now sat on a high chair.
You're listening to the last will and testament of Mark Simon Gordon.
We're in the independent micronation of Ujupis.
If I wasn't married, I'd be chasing away your indigenous 78-year-old and taking you for myself.
The drink afterwards, just to calm my nerves, will be number one, but this is definitely up there.
The Jerusalem Post podcast travel edition brings you the joys of travel and tourism. So why not subscribe today wherever you get your podcasts? We've now stopped outside a delicatessen, a restaurant. There are huge amounts of photographs of different types of meat, lots of different coloured sausages and salamis, bit of potato. It's called Magnus MB Bauch, I think. We're about to find out from Usha, our tour guide, why on earth we've stopped here. She's got a big smile on her face.
So this year, it's one of the biggest butchers here in Munich. And as you can see from the picture, this guy is actually third generation butcher here. And he got married with his wife in Bali. As a matter of fact, when he was about 19 years old, very young man, he decided to actually spend 1 year abroad. And his ways brought him to Bali, where he got to know his wife. And so he stayed there for a few years, had a hotel, etc. But in the end, he came back to his hometown, Munich. So this guy, I mean, if you're familiar, or probably you're not familiar yet with Weisswurst, which is a white sausage which we eat for breakfast with a Weiss beer, like a top fermented beer and a sweet mustard and pretzel. He makes like 1.3 tons of these white sausages every day. So it's a really, really big butcher with like 80 employees and about 16 tons of meat packing and processing a day. So this is like the main shop where he started out.
You have white beer for breakfast every day?
No, I do not. Very rarely I do.
But it's a thing?
It's a thing, yeah. So in Munich, I mean, if you want to do the real thing, and the Weiss sausage has to be eaten traditionally before noon. Why? Because in former times, they didn't have refrigerators, and to make sure the sausage wouldn't go bad, the tradition was to eat it before noon.
You're listening to the Jerusalem Post podcast travel edition with Mark Gordon and David Harris. Morning, Mark.
Morning, David. How's it going?
Yeah, all good. Slept well. Very early in the morning, and with our little delegation of journalists from all around the world, which is absolutely fascinating. Maybe we can talk about that a bit later. And we're heading into a bunker with a gentleman who has a very interesting Munich accent. Good morning.
Hello, guten Tag.
Well done. We're at the Mucke.
The Mucke Bunker. I think it stands for Museum of Urban and Contemporary Art, although there could be a Munich in it somewhere. Then we have two M's, but I think it's the Museum of Urban and Contemporary Art, which has two buildings. The one we're going to now was a World War II air raid bunker.
Let's find out what we're going to see.
Welcome to the bunker. This is actually repurposed last year. Again, we had Damien Hirst for the Love of God in here. So one of the best options we could think of as a second work in our new installation room in the bunker was Banksy's Girl Without Balloon. So the story about this piece, which you may have heard, is that in 2018 Banksy put in what appeared to be a regular standard girl and balloon into auction. It was consigned privately, and At the end of the auction, when the hammer dropped at approximately £1 million sale price, the work began to shred, and it came halfway down the canvas, and from that point the work was retitled Love is in the Bin. That work then subsequently came to the auction block again several years later and was then retitled Girl Without Balloon, and that is the piece that we have on display for you today. It actually resold for approximately $25 million on the second time round in auction. It's a fantastic example of Banksy's spin on the commercialisation of the artwork. Initially, and interestingly, if you have time just to watch the video outside, the initial idea was that the painting would fully shred when it went through, but unfortunately or fortunately that didn't happen. So what we have left is obviously the image itself halfway down the canvas. And if you would like to head through this curtain here, you can all have a look at the piece.
Mark.
David.
Banksy.
Yes. There is actually something here that says, I can't believe you morons actually buy this said by Banksy in 2006. I'm sure he's very happy to earn money doing this, but he's also shunning the fame and the publicity and the whole world of art. Ironically, we've just heard that something that would have sold for $1 million now sold for $25 million.
The space that we're in does feel very bunkery,
yes.
And it's all painted black. It's very echoey. Shall we go through the curtain and see what we're meant to look at? And we're looking at it. Yes.
I don't know if you remember and saw the original video and the news articles. You know, it's famous. But, you know, we've seen Da Vinci around the world. We've seen Monet, Picasso, Dali.
Shall we describe what we're looking at? So there's a golden gilded frame, fairly thick. The top half of it is golden. There's almost like a glow of a sun. Then the lower half is white, and there's just a red balloon floating alone. But then
underneath you can see the impact of the shredder. Half of the canvas is shredded. You can still see the outline of the girl that was holding the balloon. It's just a destroyed piece of art, you could say. But, you know, people aren't paying necessarily even for the art here. People pay 25 times as much for the notoriety.
I'll say a few quick words about various parts of the show, and then I can let you have a wander around. So this exhibition is by Alexandra Farto, also known as Veals, who is a phenomenal Portuguese artist that I've known for over 15 years now. In a nice sort of synergy with the Girl and Balloon, Veals' practice is largely about the removal, so taking things away, so destroying to create. And throughout this space you'll see various examples of this technique on different mediums. Some of the highlights around us, interestingly, the billboards that we have here, were actually the first time that Alexandra started to work with the idea of removing something to create something new. So he would actually go to the billboards when they were situated in Lisbon and then create a stencil on top of it. And rather than the stencil being used as an additive process, he began to tear away the layers of paper on the billboards and thereby creating an artwork out of that. Interestingly, from there on, he actually one day went through a little bit too deeply when he was working on the billboard and some of the wall removed from behind the billboard. It was that idea that then spurred him on to the Scratching the Surface project, which you can see behind you here, is an excellent example of that. So that is where Alex is literally working directly into a wall and chiseling away on the top layer of the wall to create an image. Just this map in front of us here, you can see the various examples that have been done worldwide. So it was a real delight to be able to have one in Munich in the museum.
The Wills, I don't know how it's pronounced, was it Vils?
I think it's Vils, but with the sort of Portuguese expression. And Chris explained how he came up with his name. His real name is Alexandra Farto, but he was a tagger. And yesterday we were watching people doing graffiti art. While he was doing his graffiti art, he liked how the letters looked, and that became his tag, which now is the name that he creates his art under.
Let's just talk through some of the pieces that we've seen here. We heard Chris describing the piece, that huge wall piece of the man's face. But we've come downstairs now, and we also went upstairs. It's a 3-floor exhibition, to some very, very different images.
Upstairs in the exhibition, you follow the origins of Wiels. You look at how he became who he is. So you see his collaborations early on with Banksy, which obviously links into the other temporary exhibition. You see some of his early works, which was graffiti, then wall art, and then he carried on his theme of destroy to create. He started working with billboards and adjusting billboards around the world, and then instead of billboards, it became concrete and the walls behind it. So there's a view of 45 permanent installations that he has around the world that were done illegally originally, but are now commissioned by cities and local authorities, including one great one on the wall of the electricity substation that is the Mucker Gallery.
One of the exhibits is actually a video showing us how he created some of his work by using explosives, tiny, tiny explosives, placed to create a person's face in concrete. It's really very impressive, and you know that I tend to look down on modern art, but this is super well thought out. And Chris was talking to Mark and I about what it is that he's trying to say through all of this work. And it's about urbanisation.
As we said initially, the works were illegal, and there were some works he's done in places like China where they were rehousing people, and he went to the houses where people were taken out of and moved into new apartments, and he put the picture of the girl that lived there and created it onto the wall. It's moved on since then. It's more about taking the materials and saying I can create with almost recycling, but it's like old walls, but then new materials as well, like resins and polystyrene, and it even moves to light and video. It's a really fascinating and creative exhibition.
Well, what a lovely way to finish our trip to Munich.
Yes, surprisingly good, I know.
Why surprisingly?
Because you're a complete art cynic and I'm not far behind you.
Oh, I see. I thought you meant about Munich in general, but yeah, it was great. Lovely. Chris was very welcoming. There is a Michelin-starred restaurant in that modern art museum.
Yes, I had to be dragged out back to the coach and onwards to wherever we're going next.
As you might have been able to tell, Chris is actually from the UK, and he's been here for 5 years, and he says one of the main draws is the restaurant.
Yes, and he then patted his belly. Staff lunches are very good.
He's a lot trimmer than you and me, I should say. Yeah, thoughts on Munich over the sort of 24 hours that we've been here?
Munich is like an ABC. There's art, there's breweries, and there's culture.
Oh, have you been practicing that?
Well, I was thinking of writing the article, Bavaria, the ABC of something or other.
Look it up in the Jerusalem Post.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The art tour was interesting to see how there's been regeneration of old industrial areas as well. The Slaughterhouse district, the Werksviertel district that we were staying in, and turned into modern, hip, trendy centres for high tech as well as culture. It's really surprised me. It's not the Munich I expected to see. I expected to see a lot more beer kellers and a lot more classical buildings.
Look, we only saw a very specific place, and the tourism organisation of Munich pointed out to us that they are trying to develop some of the suburbs and introduce those to foreign tourists and not just to domestic German and Bavarian tourists who come here, who do go to the old slaughterhouse area, etc., etc., and they want foreign tourists to have that same experience.
And Munich is a very accessible city, has an excellent transport system. You have the underground, you have the overground rail system. It's very easy to get from one side of the city to the other, and from the airport, no need to bring a car here.
Yeah, absolutely. Buses and trams, and of course you can rent a bicycle. They have a very good, in fact, there you go, right, cycling past us on a cycle path next to a main road and helmeted.
Bicycle lanes everywhere, most of which we've been blocking while we've been on our tour and upsetting cyclists all over Bavaria.
We've had some very interesting looks, particularly outside one sausage factory.
Yes. Yes, I couldn't get sausages into the sea. Maybe carnivorism.
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 Or carnivorism. I don't know how you pronounce it. Ooh, there's a sign for Garmisch-Partenkirchen. There you go. Which, of course, means that we're not that far from ski country. You'll be able to hear about other parts of Bavaria in a series of podcasts. We're not actually sure what order they're coming out, so you might have already heard the others, or they may be in the future. Do you want to say anything in the way of thank yous?
Thank you, David.
For being my friend.
No, just thank you. You're no longer my friend.
And to everybody from all around the country, because we've been joined by people from Dresden and from Frankfurt, who are part of the National Tourism Organisation.
Or the DZT.
Yes.
As they call it in Germany. Obviously, I'm not going to say the full German word. So that's thanks to Ralph, to Ines, and to Offer for helping bring us here, to Max from Munich Tourismus as well. Thank you.
Very lovely, lovely hosts. If you've enjoyed this podcast, now I'm not going to say if you've enjoyed it, because you've enjoyed this podcast, we'd like you to tell your friends about it. Please share, like, follow, etc., etc. We're across social media at Mark David Pod. You can mail us markdavidpod@gmail.com, and take a look at our YouTube channel, an increasing number of videos.
Quiz time, I believe.
Go for it.
David, where does the word Munich come from?
Munching. It's not food related.
No, it's nothing to do with sausages.
Munch. No, don't know.
So you're on the right lines with your sound. It's from the German Mönche, which means monk, because when the city, or settlement as it was established in the 12th century, it was designed for monks.
Not a lot of people knew that, but now they do.
You have a habit of saying that.
Oh, dearie me. Folks, on that bombshell, it's been a wonderful, wonderful 24 hours. Look out for Munich on your travel plans. It's well worth a stop.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Take care, folks.